Welcome to part 2 of the master class in battering intervention facilitation featuring Michelle McCormick, the executive director of the Kansas Coalition Against Sexual and Domestic Violence. In this second part, Michelle talks about how she learned to apply battering motive to the victim contacts and shares one particular case where understanding the survival-based motive made all the difference. Here's Michelle as we continue this conversation, and thanks so much for tuning in.
It felt like a really important opportunity to me to get to go work with Dorothy at the Attorney General's office, and I'm super proud of that work that we did. We, in many ways, we co-authored with the consultant, the state's domestic violence offender assessment, which is used in Kansas courts and now has been used for, 10 years probably or more. During that time, that's when I really started getting to learn from you about the important work you had done around motives and the different motives, and understanding that while folks who cause this kind of harm might, they might be using similar behaviors, the kind of dark humor that advocates would say is that there must be some sort of a handbook out there that teaches folks who cause this kind of harm how to do it, because you can see these patterns and you can see these behaviors that happen pretty routinely, right? And prior to getting to work with you on this, I really thought, based on my training, that they were all kind of the same. And what was driving some of the behavior was all of the same. And so I can remember being like, wait, what? Like the first time you were sharing with me your thoughts about motive and the different motives. And it's like that moment where like the record scratches to a halt. Like my brain was just like, wait a minute, I need more information. And then I feel like you handed me like your giant PhD thesis or something, and we're like, well, read this and then get back to me. But that was mind-blowing, and it tracked with my experience of working with survivors so well. We were still doing quite a bit of direct victim services at the AG's office. You couldn't help it. People would just call for help, and as much as we would trying to get them connected to their advocates and their programs, there were still just times when. And so I was doing a lot of safety planning still, and a lot of work with victims and survivors while I was in the BIP role, and just as sort of a victim services staff member, which meant I was getting to try out some of the application of motive, not from the perspective of using it in a group room with the folks who were causing harm, but using it as a way. Like for me, I think where I probably used it more than any other place was in safety planning and talking and engagement. I think being able to ask some really specific questions of survivors about what they were experiencing, and that tailoring the way the conversation went meant I was connecting with them very quickly, and then felt like we were doing together. I would always say, so it was in collaboration with survivors, is kind of assessing what their specific risks might be then, given that there might have been a different motivation for their partner or ex-partner than somebody else's. And so it really, as much again as I was taught to respect each survivor's situation as its own unique situation, right? You can't make generalizations about what a survivor is going through. It wasn't until I started using the motive questions and some of those tools with survivors for the purposes of helping them develop a safety plan that it really sort of got personalized and funneled down to such a way that it was such a more precise experience for them, I think. So there was a prosecutor in the office who was in a difficult position. She was prosecuting a case against a law enforcement officer, and which is why it had come to the Attorney General's office, because it was a potential conflict for the local folks. And she called and was just like, I'm desperate, Michelle. This victim is not, she's so mad at us. She is so mad at us. And so mad that we're charging her husband. And she is just not, she's not going to cooperate. But even beyond that, the prosecutor who had gone to Dorothy's motive training and was really picking up that information was like, I am scared. I think this guy has some real risks. I think he's survival based, and I think that he has the potential to cause incredible harm to her and the kids. And so if you can just try at least once, like I know you don't normally just reach out to somebody but I kind of played phone tag, and then I got the chance. Dorothy, we might have been driving somewhere. I was in the car, I know, when I talked to her the first time, but and just first she needed to really let me have it because the AG's office was charging her husband. And the dynamic really was, she was a social worker. And she was like, listen, I am trained on this stuff. What I'm experiencing is not domestic violence. I cannot believe he's being charged with these domestic violence crimes. And like, people have taken away all of my choice in this. And I can't believe, and she was really upset. And so, but I had the checklist and I was like, I hear you. Would you mind if I just ask you a few questions about because she was defending him in our initial part of the conversation. And I said, would you mind if I just ask you some questions about, maybe what he's experienced in his life? I'd like to just have some more understanding about your perspective about how he functions and what's going on with him. And just started asking her the survival-based questions, because based on sort of how she was speaking, there was just something that made me have this inkling. And as I was asking some of those questions, at some point in asking the questions and her answering, she just burst into tears and was like, I haven't ever had anybody sort of understand as much as you're understanding right now. And no one's really stopped to ask these kinds of questions. And, her ultimate, the way I'd kind of summarize that story is that she, like I, had been really trained on the entitlement that we know exists for some folks, that that's a driving motive for some folks who cause harm, is that by God, they have the right to be this way in their relationship, kind of thing. And she didn't perceive him as being predominantly that she knew there were struggles in the relationship. She knew that she even acknowledged to me that he had acted very violently, but that it wasn't coming from that place of entitlement. She knew that he was very desperate, and what she had been kind of professionally taught didn't match with that. And so that's part of why she wouldn't define it as domestic violence. And, and I know there's more to it than that, right? Like, I think it's difficult to be vulnerable and acknowledge that you're a victim. And there's just some things that happen there. But I really think she didn't understand, or the people who she was interacting with didn't understand. They weren't describing him. They were describing some other version of a domestic violence perpetrator. And so therefore she was just like, you're getting it all wrong. Ultimately, she stayed engaged. When I figured out that, and I said, what would you ultimately want to happen here? Because she was concerned for her kids. She was concerned for herself, and she wanted him to get help. She ultimately, like, if she could have waved a magic wand at that time, just wanted him to get some help. And I said, will he do that on his own? And she went, oh, no. And ultimately, she decided to cooperate with prosecution because while she knew there would be other consequences if he were convicted, She ultimately thought that that would be the opportunity for him to get help, which in the long run she believed would be better for their kids. Dorothy, what would you add? Yeah.
Well, I just think you did a great job talking with her and having that dialogue with her. And ultimately, that did make the difference. The prosecutor had said so many times since then that that really was what brought her around. And in that case, because you were so effective with her, they were able to pursue that case against him. And I served as an expert witness in that case. But what she described, her experience, and I had not heard that part. I was able to talk about what a survival-based victim often experiences, and the jury could see it just went hand in hand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was really powerful, and it also I think about maybe the times, of course, right, when you learn more and you get better maybe at your work, you think about the times that you'd wish you had known, but I do think about the times when I had prior to learning about the different motives, how I had insisted to a survivor, like, well, I bet you it's because they believe they have the right to, and they would sort of be like, okay, lady, what do you know? And that just didn't track with them. And I think about how being able, again, to understand the complexity of the folks who are engaged in relationship with others is just such an important part of our work.
Thanks for joining us for part 2 of Michelle McCormick's master class in Battering Intervention Programming Facilitation. Tune into the third part of this series where we talk with Michelle about the challenges and successes of building a network of battering intervention programs through Kansas who are all certified through the Attorney General's office. And she makes some comments about how we can improve relationships between battering intervention programming and victim services overall. Thank you all for all you do, and we'll see you in part 3.